Greetings, Twitter. I wanted to come to you live again. I tried earlier, and for some reason, when I came back from the clip, I lost audio. Okay, well, let's start over. I had the opportunity yesterday to sit down, or I took the opportunity to sit down and watch the Senate Judiciary hearing with Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Um, I knew going into it I was going to be um, irate. I was going to be frustrated, and I was. As usual, my trusted elected officials of my state of Texas, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, in conjunction with Josh Hawley, they went on the offensive, and they grilled. I mean, they grilled him hard. Secretary Mayorkas. Uh, I want to say their their attitude was wrong. Their The manner in which they handled themselves was unbecoming of a U.S. senator. They were rude. They were disrespectful. They were trying to pin the blame for the border on Secretary Mayorkas. And unfortunately, the situation at the border is not entirely his fault. It's not entirely Biden's fault. Um, but before I go any further with that, there was after all was said and done, after these senators spewed their venom, there was a senator that came up from Vermont, and he said something so true and so real. He basically expressed the reality of what was going on. And I want to play that clip in its entirety. It's like 3 minutes long. Um, but because I believe that it needs to be made known. And I've been posting it all morning on social media for that same reason, because it's something that I believe needs to be heard and needs to be reiterated, and people need to hear it come from the government perspective. Um, I've seen all the clips online from the hearing, and this has not been one of them, but I chose to make it one, and I've been plastering it everywhere I can because I want to get the point across. I'm going to play the clip, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. This clip is with Senator Peter Welch from the state of Vermont. This is what he had to say.
But first of all, Mr. Chairman, let me express the frustration I have about this whole issue. We conflate everything into one thing and never start talking specifically about the elements that we have to address. We've got a drug problem with fentanyl. That's separate from immigration, but some of it comes in on the border. And that's a serious conversation, in my view, that deserves its own focus. Second, we have a labor problem. We need more H-2A and H-2B visas. And I believe that could be dealt with and addressed separately to try to meet the needs that many of our employers have, and also to get some more control and management on the border. Third, we've got these young people who are not so young now, many of whom have served in the military, but they were brought over by their parents when they were 7 or 8 or 9 years old. We have one who's a graduate of UVM Medical School, and he has an uncertain status. And the only country he's ever really known is the United States, and he's a big contributor. We should be dealing with the Dreamers separately. And then fourth, we've got an incredible challenge at the southern border and an emerging challenge at the northern border. So whether you want to use the term crisis or not, it is a very serious problem. When 2 million people show up at your door, that's a problem because we don't have the capacity to accommodate that. And probably our toughest issue. Now, some of these issues are because Congress has failed to act. I think Senator Lee made some really good points about parole, but that's within our jurisdiction to define what that is. And if we do nothing, how can we blame an administration for trying to do something that makes sense to try to get some control over the border? So this is on Congress. And Senator Cruz, maybe I would use the term crisis at the border, because 2 million people showing up, that's a really serious problem. But it's not as though any individual who has Mr. Mayorkas' job, whether in the Trump administration or the Biden administration, can control a lot of what happens. And the thing that we're not acknowledging here is that if you have 2 million people showing up because of various factors that make them so desperate that they'll even come with their children, a war in Ukraine, a rogue rebel group showing up in Sierra Leone, chopping off hands of 16-year-old kids who then apply for refugee status, or failed states in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and people being so desperate they're willing to risk walking through the Darien Gap. I mean, Secretary Mayorkas can't handle that, and you can't stop those factors. You have nothing to do with them. You've got to deal with the consequences of them. And my view is that each one of these elements that I've described has an urgency of its own and requires focused attention, including some of these legal questions that Senator Cruz you've raised and Senator Lee has raised. That's just by way of background to express my own frustration about what I see as a failure of Congress to do its part.
Okay,